These past couple of weeks I've gone down quite a rabbit hole in BookTube. A booktuber is basically somebody who has a YouTube channel that focuses on books, and what I find is when you watch one booktuber, in the comments section you see so many other booktubers, so you find their channel, then you watch their stuff, and then in their comments they have other booktubers commenting, and so you look out at their stuff. And so over the past couple of weeks I must have subscribed to at least a dozen or more booktube channels that looked interesting. And it's particularly cool to find really small channels. In fact, a number of the ones that I subscribe to have fewer than 1,000 subscribers, just as my own channel is quite small. So it's nice to be able to find those people and to support them by subscribing, and then of course hear what they have to say about books. In this video I'm going to talk about a little book haul that I ended up with in December and January, and I'm going to talk about my TBR, which is my to be read list. Pretty sure that's what it stands for. It's a booktube thing. But I'm going to talk about all the books that I have lined up to read over the next year, probably over the next year after that, and probably into the year after that, just because I don't necessarily read super fast. So let's talk about books. I don't think I bought a single book in 2020 right up until the end of the year, just because I have so many unread books on my shelves here and a higher one, and basically I got a whole bookshelf here that has a bunch of books that I have purchased but not read yet. So I haven't really seen the need to buy more books until December rolled around and I was given a gift card for Christmas for a bookstore, and I thought, all right, let's go buy some books. It's been a while since I've done that. So the first thing I bought when I suddenly found myself with money to do so was this gigantic volume called The Books of Earthsea, the Complete Illustrated Edition by Ursula K. Le Guin. So it's pretty self-explanatory. We have apparently 6 novels and a few short stories that comprise the whole world of Earthsea, none of which I've read before. But when I saw this giant tome in the bookstore, the first time I saw it, I picked it up off the shelf. I was like, I can't spend the money on this. I put it back on the shelf. And then I got the gift card and I thought, perfect, I know what I'm getting with this. So this is a 992 page beast that I'm going to have to get to at some point. Next up is a book by an author who has written some of my very favorite books of all time, but who has unfortunately been falling flat for me with the past couple of books I've read from him. This is Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay, and as I said, the last couple of Kay's books have been disappointing, especially in comparison to what I think about some of his series, such as the Fiona of Our Tapestry, which is my very favorite high fantasy trilogy of all time, and the Sarantine Mosaic, which is a duology that's basically some of my straight up favorite fiction of all time. But so I know that Kay can write amazing books, and I've heard from a couple of booktubers that Tigana has blown them away. So when I heard on more than one occasion that this is a top book for a couple of these YouTubers, I thought, great, I trust the author can write well, and I know that this particular book must be good if more than one person are singing its praises so highly. So I have full confidence that Tigana is going to be an enjoyable read when I get to it. Next up is a collection of short stories called Rogues, which has been edited by George R.R. Martin and Gardner Dozois, and which has a compilation of stories based on very roguish characters who are perhaps more gray in their moral leanings than black or white. And the collection of authors that have contributed to this volume is a real who's who of fantasy writers. I mean, just on the front cover here, it lists Gillian Flynn, Patrick Rothfuss, Connie Willis, Neil Gaiman, Joe Abercrombie, Scott Lynch. So there's just a ton of very well-respected authors that have contributed stories to this collection. But the reason I purchased it was because of Patrick Rothfuss. He contributed a story called The Lightning Tree that expands on one of the characters from the Kingkiller Chronicles, a character named Bast. So this short story focuses on Bast, and I guess tells us more about that particular character. Now, I refuse to actually read anything more related to the Kingkiller Chronicles until such time as that third book appears, if it ever does. And I'm probably about 50-50 at this point whether I think it's going to ever come into fruition or not. But in a similar manner to a book that Rothfuss published, this one here behind me, which is called The Slow Regard of Silent Things, and it is an exploration of the character of Ori, and it was a beautiful little kind of short story sidetrack from the Kingkiller Chronicles that I did end up reading. But I am hoping that someday I'll get to read this other short story because that third book has appeared, but I'm not holding my breath because I will become blue in the face rather quickly. Meanwhile, though, there are a lot of other stories by authors that I am interested in checking about in this book, and this might be a fun one to kind of dive into every now and then in between other reads, where I can maybe read a short story or two and then get back to another book, and so it'll be pretty approachable in that regard. And then the final book I picked up is by an author who I have not read any of his books, as prolific an author as he is, and this is Jim Butcher, and a book called The Aeronaut's Windlass. Now, Jim Butcher is very well known for his very lengthy Dresden Files series, which I've heard doesn't get off to a super great start, but as you get into the series, it becomes very good, is what I've heard from other booktubers. And so I thought, okay, I'm interested by the good things that are being said about the Dresden Files, but then I found out that this particular book is the first in a series of steampunk novels, and I thought, I really want to find some good steampunk reading because it's such a cool and interesting setting, but I've never really found a steampunk book that really excited me. So I thought, hey, maybe Jim Butcher can write a good steampunk novel, and I'm about halfway through it at the moment. I will talk about it when I'm done, but I'll give you a little spoiler by saying it's been a lot of fun so far. So this is one that I am well into already. So those are the books I've purchased, these 4 new books. What about the ones that I intend to read? I'll get to that in just a second, but first I want to send out a thank you to my Patreon supporters. In particular, I want to thank my higher level supporters, Joanna and Paul, for your help with my endeavors here. It really does mean a lot. I now have 2 Patreon exclusive videos on my Patreon, the last one being almost 45 minutes long, where I'm going through my life talking about how I ended up on disability. And so that's a series that you can see if you sign up for my Patreon. It's only $2 a month at the lowest level, so if that's something you want to do, I would love to have you. But let's talk about my list of books to be read. And this has taken shape in large part because of all the booktubers I've been watching, particularly those that focus on the fantasy genre, because that is just a genre that I am increasingly drawn to over time, just for its escapism, for its ability to take my mind away from real life into another wonderful, whimsical world. Something that I really desperately need where I've ended up at this point in my life. So I am certainly appreciative when it can provide me with that sort of escapism. So having watched all these booktubers and their various recommendations, I've compiled a list of books that sound like they would be right up my alley, and I've ranked them so that the ones that I'm most excited about are at the top of my to-be-read list. And what I typically do when I read books is I often will read a fiction book followed by a nonfiction, followed by a fiction, and I'll sort of bounce back and forth in that manner. So the first several books here are alternating between fiction and nonfiction. And the first one, as you have seen, is The Aeronaut's Windlass by Jim Butcher. As I said, I'm halfway through that book. Been getting lots of reading time in my bath. Just today I went for a 45-minute walk in minus 22 degrees Celsius weather, and then got in a nice cozy Epsom salts bath and read for about an hour in the bathtub. I seem to do more reading in my bathtub these days than I do in my bed at night, but hey, I am trying to do more reading because I have this whole list of exciting books to cover. So that's the first one on my to-be-read list, and I am making good progress there. The next book is a purchase from late last year. It's called The Last Full Measure: How Soldiers Die in Battle by Michael Stevenson. This is now nonfiction, and it covers a lot of history. It goes back to ancient battles up to modern day soldiers, and it talks about the experience of death. And it's just something that interests me, having been a paramedic for 16 years and having dealt with a lot of death, having almost died myself a couple of times. It's just one of those topics that I'm fascinated with and I'm interested in reading about, as morbid as it may be. So that's my number 2. My number 3 is Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. I'm very excited to check out this book based on things that I've heard, as I mentioned. Number 4 is Waterloo Voices 1815 by Martin Beardsley. This is a bunch of first-hand accounts from soldiers who were at the Battle of Waterloo. And so it will be very interesting from a historical perspective to hear these soldiers tell about their experiences in the battle. And I found this one amazing quote right in the introduction here that I thought was quite hilarious. Oh dang, it wasn't in this book. Which book was that in? Was it in Waterloo, Day of Battle by David Howarth? It was. Oops. I'll still read you the quote just because I mentioned it and it's pretty good. So there was this British soldier who says, among all the accounts of the vast historic drama, my favorite was given by a very small British soldier on the morning after the battle. The soldier says, quote, I'll be hanged if I know anything about the matter, was all he could find to say, for I was all day trodden in the mud and ridden over by every scoundrel who had a horse. That's a pretty great quote from one of the most epic battles in history. But it's Waterloo Voices here that I'm interested in checking out. Hopefully for more epic quotes like that one. Then, swinging back to fiction. Most of the rest of these books I don't actually own at this point. It's going to be a while before I get to them anyways, so the rest of them are actually series of books. So each of these is either a science fiction or a fantasy series. I expect what I'll do is I've kind of learned my lesson about buying fantasy series, because there have been several now where I've bought the series, I've read the first book and gone, no, I'm not going to continue with the rest of the series, and then ended up donating the books to the thrift shop. So my intention is, I think, to get the first book of the series from the library. If it captures my interest and I enjoyed enough to keep reading the series, at that point I would probably purchase the rest of the series. But the first one here, which is number 5 on my list, is the 3 books of the Machineries of Empire trilogy by Yoon Ha Lee that starts out with a book called Nine Fox Gambit. This is an epic sci-fi space opera written by a trans man, which is very cool. I read very little science fiction because I find a lot of the times it's natural focus on the technical aspect of the science and the technology that they're involved with takes away from the narrative experience of the story for me. So I haven't enjoyed much of the science fiction I've read, and so I don't read a lot of sci-fi anymore. But this one has been highly recommended by one of the booktubers that I follow, and I thought, I've never really read a sci-fi space opera before, so that sounds pretty cool. I wouldn't mind diving into that, so that's why it's at my number 5. At number 6 is a 5-book fantasy series called the Lightbringer series by Brent Weeks, and it starts off with a book called The Black Prism. I know very little about the series, other than it comes highly recommended by a couple of people. Number 7, we have 4 books of the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne that starts out with a book called Malice that, once again, more than one booktuber have raved about. So that's why it's fairly high up on my TBR list here. And speaking of YouTubers raving about a book series, number 8, we have the 3 books of the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie that starts with a book called The Blade Itself. This is supposedly a more grim, dark fantasy, which is not really a setting I have much experience with. So that could be really interesting. I've heard that the characters he writes are just simply amazing, so I would love to dive into that series. The final one on this particular list is coming back around to the books of Earthsea, where I have the 6 novels and other short stories in here, and it's already on my shelf, so I need to get to it at some point. This brings us to a total, with all the books in all these series mentioned, of 25 books. but I can see myself reading maybe standalone books in between each of the series as I finish up the series, so it might end up being more than 25 books by the time I get to the Le Guin series at the end of this list. So with 25 plus books, I'm expecting this to take me definitely to the end of 2022, probably well into 2023 by the time I get to all of it. Though, like I said, I do want to prioritize reading a little bit more because I love engaging with other readers on BookTube, and it's something I would like to participate in a little bit, even though my channel is way too scattered topically to be part of BookTube. I guess it's primarily a board gaming channel and secondarily books, and then after that we've got a bunch of other hobby stuff that I talk about. It's basically all just stuff that makes me happy and that hopefully by talking about can make you happy too. But the point is, I want to talk about the books a little bit more and be more involved with that discussion. And I just keep hearing about great stuff that I really feel like I need to check out. This is just a small sample of all of the books that I have listed that look intriguing to me. These are just the ones that I've sort of pulled off the larger list and said, yeah, I definitely want to prioritize these particular ones, because the full amount of books that I actually have on my list of things that caught my interest is pretty vast. Dozens and dozens of them for sure. So anyways, the series that I have here that I've prioritized, I don't know if you are familiar with any of these series that I've just mentioned, and maybe if you are familiar and think very highly of something and you think I should bump it up in my list of books to be read, definitely let me know. The series, in order again, that I currently plan on reading them, we have Machineries of Empire, Lightbringer, The Faithful and the Fallen, The First Law, and the Books of Earthsea. If you think I need to bump something up higher in the list, do let me know. And in any case, I do want to know what you've been reading. I want to talk about books with you, so please do let me know. The preceding video has been brought to you free of charge by me, Josh. The only thing I ask in return is that you could do one of the following: give me a thumb up, push the subscribe button, or share the link to this video with somebody who you think would enjoy it. Cheers. Basically just somebody who has a YouTube channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about a little, but let's talk about books now. For God's sake. Let's do it. And so by the time which is straight up basically a couple of the, which is a duology that is straight up some of my favorite, which is a duology that is pretty much straight up some of my favorite which is a duology that's basically straight up some of my Gardner Dozois. I will spoil it to say by it. I will spoil it by. But let's talk about my TBR now. But let's talk about my books of list in the order of what. But it's one of those Epsom